All yours, Chair.
Thank you, Gareth. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Education and Skills Policy Development Committee. It's Wednesday, the 16th of March, and it's stopped. The winds to calm down, and the weather is a bit cold, but it's fine for the moment, which is always nice to see. So we will dive into the agenda without further ado. Apologies for absence, Gareth. I've got
Yes.
Councillor Mike Lewis and Councillor Bev Hopkins.
And Councillor Myers Langston as well, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. Do we have any disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests? No, okay, and we can move straight on then into agenda item number 3, which is the minutes of the last meeting. So can I go through them page by page, please? Page 1, page 2, page 3, and page 4. And are you content for me to approve? Yes?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And we can sign them as a correct record. So we move on to agenda item number 5, and there is a little typo on there. It says outdoor play, but the outdoor education is the focus for us now. And this was something raised in a previous meeting by Councillor Fiona Gordon. So I'm delighted this afternoon that we've got 2 people coming along to help us understand key aspects of outdoor education. We've got Dr. Emily Marchant from the Swansea University, the Child and Health Education Researcher, and Mr. Dylan Sayer from the head teacher of Croyce Primary School in Three Crosses. So can I welcome you both to the meeting, and thank you very much for coming along. It is very much appreciated. So we sometimes we have a bit of a fight, who's going to go first, but can I suggest, please, that Emily from the university kicks off, and then Dylan can pick up afterwards, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, hi everyone. Nice to virtually meet you all. Am I okay to share my screen? I'm not sure if I have access, but I'm going to share a presentation if that's okay.
There's rules about this, Emily, and Gareth will tell us what they are. Go on, Gareth.
Yeah, it needs to be bilingual, Emily.
Yep, got it in bilingual.
There we go. Fantastic.
So let me just figure out how to do that on Teams. My computer doesn't seem to like it. Let me try it. Okay, it's just loading hopefully, but I'll just give you a really quick introduction about myself. So I'm primarily going to be talking from the research end of things today, because I'm a researcher and I'm an academic based in Swansea University in the medical school. My specialism is children's health, wellbeing and education, primarily looking at the primary school years and looking at how sort of different school-based interventions can improve children's health, wellbeing and learning outcomes, but also looking at a population level, so looking at sort of epidemiological research. And for the last 2 years, my research has been entirely COVID based, which I'll talk a little bit about, but it's great to have outdoor sort of education. You did mention play, and play is also part of it, and outdoor learning as part of today's focus. So my computer is just loading, it's about 75%. But what I'm going to talk about today is the findings from an evaluation that I conducted a couple of years back, just before COVID, and which Dylan from Croyce was a part of. And I'm going to talk about some of the findings. But before I do that, I'm going to set the scene a little bit with some of the wider COVID research that myself and some of the team I work with have conducted that really paint a picture of why outdoor learning is quite an important, the potential it has really in addressing some of the challenges and the impacts of the last 2 years on children. So can everyone see my slides okay? Yeah. Yes, brilliant. Yeah. Great. Yes. So yeah, I'll make a start. And I'm just going to also give a little bit of a background behind Happen, which is a primary school network. And during my PhD, my role was to develop and expand Happen from what was a local project in Swansea to like a national platform and infrastructure for schools across Wales. And Happen is a network that brings together research and schools in order to improve outcomes for children. But all this research that I'm going to talk about is sort of conducted through the network as such. But the reason why today is really important is because we know that investing in learning and the education setting has the potential in improving a range of children's outcomes throughout their life in terms of employment, economic outcomes, and also their health and well-being during adulthood. But as we know, COVID-19, the impact of school closures, prolonged time away from the school environment, and all the other wider sort of challenges from the pandemic have resulted in really widened inequalities across children's health, across their well-being, and of course, across their education as well. So just to give some kind of really brief background as to why we developed a network in order to conduct research in studies such as outdoor learning, is we held some interviews with head teachers, healthy school coordinators across Swansea to find out what some of the barriers were for schools in prioritising health and well-being within the school setting. And there was very much an understanding that health and well-being is important. And, you know, we've got the new curriculum for Wales, which is going to be rolled out from September this year now, which has come around very fast. But of course, schools know that there's an increasing need to meet academic targets. Schools want to be sort of part of the solution. So working with people, collaborating and having autonomy in sort of improving the health, well-being and learning outcomes of their pupils. So based on that, a network was developed, and the idea of the network was to bring together research with schools and also with sort of public health or school-based initiatives in order to support schools in prioritising health and well-being. And as the network has developed over the last couple of years, it's really moved now towards being what we're calling a curriculum tool. And the idea is that schools, in designing their new curriculum, of which health and well-being is one of the 6 areas of learning and experience, because schools are given this autonomy in how they design and develop their curriculum and the content, the idea is that they can design and develop that based on their learners' needs. And we have a survey called the Happen Survey, which is a self-report questionnaire about children's health behaviours, where they report on a number of different sort of typical health behaviours. And the idea is that schools then get that data back as a school report, and that allows them to design their new health and wellbeing AOLE aligned to exactly what the needs are of the cohort of pupils in that school. And just to give a little bit more background behind Happen, and just so that you're all aware, I guess, of the potential and the research that we can do if you ever are interested in sort of future topics. So children in years 4 to 6 take part in a survey. As I said, that's shared back to schools as a school report. And the idea is it informs the design of their new curriculum. And we've had over 20,000 pupils take part in the survey over the last sort of 5 years. And we've had over 500 primary schools across Wales now engaged with Happen. We also have access to something at the university called the SAIL data bank, which stores population level, anonymised, routinely collected records across health, administrative data and education. So what we're able to do is to link the data from the Happen survey with any data that you can imagine that exists on pretty much everything. So we can look at children's birth weight, vaccinations, factors to do with parenting, breastfeeding, any sort of maternal mental health problems, and also importantly then with educational attainment. So we can look at how health and well-being from birth, early years and primary school can impact educational attainment outcomes. But the purpose of today is to talk about outdoor learning. So the network's also a platform for doing that sort of research, where we conduct evaluations of a range of different programs or interventions that are delivered in school. And one of the ones that we conducted was an evaluation of outdoor learning. And that all came about from Dylan, who's on the call here, who rung me up a few years ago, had sort of heard about Happen. We hadn't sort of even met or worked together before. And he said that he really wanted to integrate outdoor learning because he knew that there was benefits. But as always, schools kind of lack that evidence and that research behind it. And I'll let Dylan talk about some of the background as to how it kind of all started in Swansea. I'll just talk about the research today. but I'll also talk about why outdoor learning, play, outdoor education, whatever term we're referring it to, is really, really crucial because of the last 2 years. And that will be through a number of sort of papers that we've published as a research team over the last year. So the first one I'm just going to scan through is based on a survey we conducted with pupils during the lockdown period and during school closures. So our typical Happen survey, which we'd got to a stage where before COVID, Happen had expanded nationally across Wales, but everything that we designed was for the school setting. So when COVID came about, we had to really sort of rapidly adapt what we were doing in order to continue supporting schools in their in understanding the impacts on children's health and well-being. So we created what was called the Happen at Home survey, which allowed pupils to take part in a similar type of questionnaire to examine what their health and well-being looked like during those school closure period. My colleague, Dr. Michaela James, led this study, and the idea was to look at how health and well-being changed from pre-COVID, so from 2018, from 2019, and then during 2020. And she looked at that in sort of two, as pupils as a whole, but also then whether children were eligible for free school meals or not, which we use as an indicator for deprivation. So the reason this is important for outdoor learning is that one of the findings from the study was that as a whole, there were improvements in children's reported physical activity. However, children's reported school competency, so essentially how good they think they are in school, reduced during school closures. But when we looked at that as a group from whether children were eligible for free school meals or not, actually those improvements were amongst non-free school meal children. So again, this idea of widening inequalities really comes to play with this, and that the decline in how children felt about their ability and competency in school was far higher in the group that were eligible for free school meals. We think that's partly to do with support at home for home learning and home learning environments in affecting children's perception of their sort of academic ability. So yeah, just trying to skim through these studies to really set the scene for outdoor learning and its importance is that inequalities have widened. We know that, for example, access to outdoor spaces has been really diminished over the last couple of years. And that a lot of the improvements that we saw in children's health and well-being were really amongst those from less deprived areas. So the other study that I'm just going to skim through again to set the scene for outdoor learning, its importance, was to find out from the perspectives of school staff what they thought were the impacts of schools closing and the lockdowns on children's health, well-being and their education. So we developed an online survey for primary school staff. It could be, support staff, teaching assistants, head teachers, whoever worked in primary school was able to take part in the survey. And we had over 200 primary school staff from 78 schools across 16 local authorities take part in the survey. And based on the findings and the responses from school staff, we developed 5 recommendations to take forward on what, aligned to what are the needs and priorities for children, for pupils and for staff in kind of addressing the impacts of school closures. The one I'm going to quickly talk about is about the health and well-being of pupils. Staff highlighted that there was a range of negative impacts on children's physical and mental health, their social development because of a lack of social interaction. They reported that children were less physically active. When schools reopened, they observed that children were unfit, had gained weight, but there was also positive examples reported by staff, such as strengthened family relationships, but a real variation in opportunities for children from different backgrounds. And one of the things that staff consistently mentioned was time outdoors. When schools returned, staff were worried that there was going to be the big focus on the thing we've seen in the media, which is catching up, and all about academic targets, and actually that what everyone needs to be prioritizing and focusing on is the health and well-being of pupils, because being healthy and happy is really a prerequisite for children to be able to reach their full potential in an academic environment. And also a concern for staff well-being because of that sort of blurred lines. This is a quote taken from a member of staff. Blurred lines between their sort of home life and work life balance. So one of the recommendations for addressing this was that staff called for more opportunities for outdoor provision. That included outdoor learning through the curriculum, forest schools opportunities, but also just outdoor play. So protecting playtime for children is a key sort of recommendation going forward. These are just some of the quotes that I've taken to really give a little bit more life to some of the boring kind of slides, just reporting lots of what we found this and what we found that. I think it's always useful to have some actual context. So if I just quickly pick a couple, well-being's been an issue for our pupils. Some pupils have struggled with their mental health, lack of social interaction with peers. Some have had no learning or have not had the support at home. The list is endless, working in a special educational needs school. So really that whole kind of premise of lack of access to outdoor opportunities, that sort of reduction in children's physical activity, and really the impact that this is now having and that we're now seeing now that we're back in school. So these are the 5 recommendations. I'm not going to go through all of them, just so that you're aware for sort of any future kind of topics that you're covering. But really it's about bringing parents, enabling that parental engagement with school, the importance of having a strong working relationship with parents, the problems with, you know, digital, the competency of staff, of pupils and of parents. The 4th recommendation is about class size, reducing class size, focusing on well-being with a higher staff to pupil ratio, and just ensuring communication with schools along the way. So now for the actual kind of topic of today's meeting. I know that those last few slides weren't specifically about outdoor learning, but really I think we've got to consider it in a broader context as well. And I think that, you know, emerging, touch wood, from the pandemic, as we look to the sort of COVID recovery plans for schools, I think that outdoor learning and, you know, providing schools with support opportunities to embed outdoor learning really addresses some of the impacts from the pandemic that range across children's health, well-being and education. So these next few slides are about the findings from the evaluation of outdoor learning that I led a few years ago, but they're more topical than ever now, I think. When you look at the evidence base behind being outdoors and its impact on people, on humans, I couldn't quite believe it when I kind of started doing this project. There's decades of research showing that being outdoors is an essential component for essentially human development. So on how our brains develop, on how we interact, on how we relieve stress, improve our well-being. Being outdoors is a critical part of how we develop as a species. And for children, it's a critical component for their development. And that's because being outdoors has got a range of positive sort of improvements on their physical, mental, social, and emotional health. I've got a few pictures on the slides just to show some sort of stats. So this is just some headlines taken from The Guardian. 3/4 of UK children spend less time outdoors than prison inmates. Children spend only half as much time playing outside as their parents did. And when we think of the school setting and we think how many hours of a child's waking day they spend in school, it's a large window as such for opportunities for children to be outside. And when you look at the research behind what it does in terms of our development as people, being outdoors improves our brain function, it improves creativity, risk-taking, imagination, freedom and play, that's for children and adults, improves our mood, as I'm sure you're all aware. It helps with concentration, awareness, and reasoning. And the book screenshot on the top right is taken from an academic called Richard Louv, who's developed a term called nature deficit disorder. And he essentially proposes a theory that because over the last sort of decade or two, we're spending more and more time indoors, it's actually having an impact on brain development and so on. So really being outdoors is a critical component for all of us, I think, for children especially, but, you know, the population. So why did we conduct the research? Well, there's a growing need for learning and education to not only improve curriculum needs and curriculum aims, but also to support that holistic health and well-being of children, because it's such a key component of children reaching their potential. And particularly now more than ever, with the curriculum for Wales about to come into effect, and during a period of sort of COVID recovery, this is a priority for schools, really, is to simultaneously improve health, well-being and also learning outcomes. We've seen efforts to integrate outdoor learning for years and years and years, particularly with the sort of foundation phase when that was formed, which a lot of the learning is through play and experiential learning. But that's really as far as it goes when you're looking at any sort of embedded efforts for outdoor learning. It's increasing in its sort of popularity, particularly if you search the word outdoor learning in the new curriculum guidance, it features throughout, but it's still really underutilized in primary schools and particularly beyond primary. So it's already underutilized in sort of key stage 2. If we look to comp sort of ages, it's not really there whatsoever, and that's because there are a lot of barriers, and the way the curriculum, I guess, is delivered isn't essentially how teachers have been trained to teach. They've been trained to teach indoors. So we conducted a qualitative evaluation of curriculum-based outdoor learning in 3 primary schools in Swansea, and this was prior to the establishment of what is now a very successful group or network called Swansea Outdoor Schools, which Dylan will speak a little bit about. And the research involved interviews with teachers, head teachers, and then focus groups with pupils. And the aim was to try to explore what the barriers and the facilitators were to effective implementation of outdoor learning in order to inform how schools, and not just schools, but stakeholders, can create sort of supportive environments for outdoor learning. So some of the benefits that were cited in terms of just being outdoors was that children felt free, that freedom aspect. They were able to express themselves, and there was, multiple times was mentioned about that cramped classroom, the horrible environment indoors. Schools felt that children had a right to be outdoors, and when we think of the United Nations Convention on Rights of a Child, how important that is now, and schools felt that they were in a position to fulfill that right for children. An interesting finding is that outdoor learning seems to increase children's affinity towards nature, and we know that affinity and that affective response to nature is associated with our sort of environmental behaviours. So in terms of sustainability, which is obviously so topical and high on the agenda, children being outdoors and developing that sort of relationship with nature can help in terms of their environmental awareness and encouraging in sort of positive, participating in positive environmental behaviours. And for each slide, I've always liked to include a quote, as you saw on a few slides ago. And this is a quote saying, from a pupil, "I think that they, the teachers, like us being outdoors because maybe they don't like us feeling stressed, because we could be stressed in the classroom. And instead of being stressed, we're outdoors and we're happy." In terms of benefits to learning, so the previous slide was just sort of that, the benefit of being broadly outdoors, but obviously the purpose of going outdoors is also to as a method of teaching and learning. Schools reported that there was an increased engagement with learning and also increased engagement with school. Dylan will probably mention multiple examples of this in terms of specific pupils, but it really was this idea of children being really excited to go to school, couldn't wait for the day that they were outdoors, and just really being engaged with the learning process as well. The opportunities for learning styles, I guess, are a lot more broad outdoors, and children really enjoyed learning through play. They enjoyed that multi-sensory experience and the benefits of sort of teaching and learning through different means than just, reading off a whiteboard as such, but having that experiential, moving learning through play. I think this one's always an interesting thing, because I think that the preconception of going outdoors is that children are probably going to mess around and not actually concentrate on the learning. But really the opposite was found from the feedback from teachers and head teachers, was that actually it really improved children's behaviour. It really improved their concentration. And there is actually sort of brain development theories behind that in terms of concentration, that being outdoors helps us to really focus in on the task and improve our own concentration. The really sort of important finding in terms of learning is the way that curriculum outdoor learning engages all types of learners, and that means children with behavioural problems, particularly children with other special educational needs. It really is a tool that can be used for all pupils and kind of benefits all pupils in different ways, and that's really what comes out from a lot of other research as well. So this is another quote: "When we go to the woods, we don't really know what we're doing. We're actually doing maths. And it's just making it educational and fun at the same time." And it's this whole thing of, in the paper I called it accidental learning, where children don't actually realize they're doing a math lesson. To them, they're just out, outdoors with their peers and their friends, playing, having fun, but actually there's learning processes going on there. And I think that quote sort of captures it really well. In terms of the wider benefits to children, it really helped to improve wider skills. So skills such as teamwork and cooperation, and the way that sort of pedagogy of teaching outdoors changes and allows these different skills to really be developed through different sort of group tasks and so on. And, linking back to the findings from the impacts on children's physical activity of sort of the COVID period, pupils enjoyed that additional opportunity to be outdoors and to be moving and to be physically active. So aside from sort of learning, well-being and so on, the fact that children are engaging in more physical activity is also a real benefit, because being physically active is a really critical part of child development, but also for a range of different outcomes, both short and longer term for children. Importantly, it improved children, pupils, teachers' well-being, and reduce their feelings of stress. And again, this is just based on the study in Swansea schools, but when you delve really into the academic research behind it, there is a huge amount of research about the benefits of being outdoors for our own well-being. I guess when you think about it, when you book a hotel, you always ask for a room with a view, or when you're feeling a bit stressed, you go for a walk. We have this real interaction with being outside that relieves stress. And the interesting finding, not to forget how this is impacting school staff, who are actually the ones delivering the outdoor learning, but it increased teachers' job satisfaction. And when this paper was published, and I sort of worked with the media and getting it out there, this was interestingly something that was picked up more than the impacts on children, was about teacher job satisfaction. Because when you think about, particularly now again with teacher retention rates and so on, this is a really key finding, I think, and probably something that might be overlooked and not considered when you're thinking about outdoor learning and you're thinking about the benefits to children and to their well-being and so on. So I think that's a really key finding. Another quote: "The opportunity to work as a group, they love the activities, they get challenging activities, they get to use their problem-solving skills, they've got discussion skills." Again, just those range of skills that being outdoors can support in children's development and really set them up to reach their potential in the school setting. But of course, with anything, there's always barriers. And unfortunately, at the time, this study was conducted in 2018 to 19. The new curriculum, although it was kind of being discussed, it wasn't really embedded anywhere apart from in sort of pioneer schools. Curriculum pressure was one of the barriers in children meeting the aims of the curriculum, and more so being able to evidence how, as opposed to actually the fact it can meet those aims. And really accountability from school staff was a barrier. Evidencing work, and a lot of that comes down to teacher training, really, because when you think about the current cohort as such of teachers and educators, they were taught to teach indoors, and that's the methods that they know. Dylan might mention that actually through the Swansea Outdoor Schools Network, they developed a resource booklet which is shared across schools that provides, you know, ways of evidencing work and so on. But at the time, that was a problem for staff. Distractions were initially an issue. I think it's more that novelty of going outside initially for pupils and being very, very excited. But actually, staff said that once it was embedded, and the same with safety, once these were embedded, you know, there were clear rules and boundaries, and children were very much engaged in the task ahead. And this is just a quote from a staff member saying, "The main concern for us upper key stage 2 is evidence of work, because there's such a pressure now to have evidence, recorded evidence for every session." So to sort of summarize the findings from the potential of outdoor learning, the benefits kind of range from physical, social, personal, and also across the curricular domains of outdoor learning. It has the ability to enthuse, engage, and to support children of all learning abilities in reaching curricular aims alongside positive improvements to their health and well-being. And the findings really advocate that not only do we need to provide schools opportunities, but actually the help and support for schools to feel that these sort of what might or used to be considered non-traditional learning methods are valued, and they can address the curriculum pressures in which schools are judged on. And particularly now, as we look to emerge from COVID, outdoor learning provides a real potential tool in the sort of education and wellbeing recovery of children and staff. And, you know, in terms of the finding there about addressing curriculum pressures that schools are judged on, during this time, the inspection framework changed and the wellbeing and attitudes to learning component came in. And then, interestingly, there was a real shift in how Estin and so on recognise the potential of outdoor learning, which we'll cover in a minute from Dylan's perspective. And I love this quote. "My feeling is just like, wow, this is just what I came into teaching for." So yeah, it's really important to consider as well the benefits for teachers and for school staff with outdoor learning. I'll skip through this slide, but just to share sort of, you know, this was just a small little study in Swansea, but I managed to make it sort of go viral across the world, and it was picked up by the World Economic Forum. It was discussed on news in America. It was featured on Asia's largest news channel, but importantly, we now include all the findings in all the reports that go back to schools, so that schools have got sort of a list of barriers, benefits, facilitators and things, and evidence in order to know how to integrate outdoor learning within the curriculum. And back to a couple of slides ago, in terms of education inspectorates valuing outdoor learning, this is a screenshot from Dylan's previous Estin report, which I'm sure he'll be more than happy for me to share. But, you know, now that wellbeing and attitudes to learning is one of the inspection areas, outdoor learning now is becoming more popular because it really can simultaneously improve wellbeing and attitudes to learning. And that's pictured here with how Estin have sort of picked up on the importance of outdoor learning in the curriculum in Croyce. It says school staff are proud advocates of the benefits of outdoor learning and pupils. They've worked with Swansea University on a project. Pupils talk passionately about their love of outdoor learning, the positive impact this has on their well-being. Nearly all staff foster and promote pupil well-being through effective use of the outdoors, and so on. And as you can see from the slide, well-being and attitudes to learning they were awarded an excellent judgment, which is fantastic. So I think that's probably a good time for me to pass over to Dylan to speak about this in more detail from the perspectives of schools.
You can have a breath now, Emily, for a minute.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't really stopped. I probably.
Thank you very much.
I've got a cold coffee next to me now.
And then over to Dylan. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm not quite as eloquent with presenting as Emily is. I tend to speak more from the heart. Well, not that Emily doesn't, but I tend to speak from the heart, and I'll tell you about our journey really as a school. So some 6 years ago.
I just say, Dylan, do we need the slides on now, or can we take the slides off?
I don't have slides. I'm just going to talk, I'm afraid, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Most of the picture, well, all of the pictures in Emily's presentations were actually Croyce Primary, so it'll give you a little taste of what our children do. But obviously we're based in Three Crosses on the Gower, and spoilt, if you like, for where we're based. But at the same time, just to point out that the school itself has no green. We have no grassed area or anything. So we rely on a little woodland which is down the road. But that said, about 6 years ago, knowing the benefits there were to outdoor learning, I did feel that if we couldn't do it in Three Crosses, then who could, basically, as I said, with a local woodland which is looked after by the local community council down the road. So 6 years ago, we decided to throw ourselves into it as a whole school. So from age 3 to 11, nursery to year 6, and we also have an SDF, a special teaching facility. So we included all pupils in this. We made a commitment we were going to try for a year that all pupils would spend at least half a day in the outdoors every week. Bar for crazy weather or very windy weather, it would go ahead, and sort of parents bought into this, pupils bought into this. So if there was a bit of rain, they put coats on. If it was a bit cold, they put an extra jumper on. And obviously summer differently. But we, as I said, we decided to throw ourselves into it, give it a year, see how it turned out. And here we are 6 years later. It's very much part of our curriculum, and children know that nursery, for example, on a Thursday morning, they know they spend Thursday morning in the wood. Now, everyone's familiar with the word forest school. We're not forest school. Forest school tends to be den building and fire starting and what have you. And that does form part of our curriculum. But what we've decided to do is take the curriculum outdoors. So as opposed to a lesson being classroom based, it's based in the outdoors effectively. And then obviously our planning, we will choose topics or texts to meet those needs and to suit those needs. But it's give a practical way of teaching in a different environment effectively. So it moves us on really to we at the end of the year we decided that this was good. We were going to carry on. Obviously, staff initially were quite apprehensive. Were there ideas for lessons going to dry up? But I always say teachers are the most resourceful people you can imagine. Give a teacher a ping pong ball and a bucket and they will think up a scheme of work. So as I said, they're so resourceful, and obviously with the change of seasons, etc., lends itself to different activities. So the staff were on board, the children were on board. So we thought we're going to go with this. We're going to carry on. But then we had Estyn looming, and obviously at the time there was much more focus on standards. So how could you prove that outdoor learning was having this positive impact on number one, standards, and of course, was it worthwhile really? The fact that the school had the highest attendance in Swansea, which I put down to children wanting to come to school. You know, at the end of the day, happy children learn. And if they wanted to come to school, obviously our attendance was a marker for that. We had attendance of 97% pre-COVID, which, as I said, was the highest in Swansea. I'm sure I've already said that. I do apologise. And then obviously the other thing was the fact the end of Key Stage 2 standards, our standards were also amongst the highest in Swansea. So it was obviously, if it wasn't directly impacting on standards, it wasn't having a detrimental effect on standards. But again, difficult to prove, and hence how our relationship with Emily started really. And Emily produced this quantitative analysis really, qualitative analysis of our outdoor learning project. And then lo and behold, just before COVID, the summer before COVID, Estyn did come a knocking, and luckily for us, they looked upon it very positively. We came out of it with excellent standards, or excellent judgment for standards and well-being. The outdoor learning provision was highlighted throughout our inspection policy, our inspection report, and indeed we are now on the, we have a case study on the Estyn website for effective practice. During this process as well, we try to create a network of like-minded schools. I knew Gowerton School, who had just moved into a new building. They were doing lots of work with outdoor learning as well. So I approached Mrs. Ralph there, and we tried to generate this outdoor network of like-minded schools who could basically help each other. Through that, we got some Erasmus funding, some European funding, and we started a 2-year project with schools from Sweden, Finland, Ireland, and Italy. During that year then, we produced a booklet of over 60 activities, which given that bank of ideas and resources to staff. And luckily, following that project, we actually received funding for another 2-year project, which has now been postponed 18 months, but will start again now in September. So we start on another project in September, another 2-year project with same countries, but looking at how the activities for the 6 areas of learning can be evolved and developed. So going back really to Swansea Outdoor Schools, the fact was that it was becoming such a large workload, if you like, because I couldn't do it because I had a school to run. The coordinator, the outdoor learning coordinator in Gowerton couldn't do it, and not so much it fell flat on its face, but between that and then COVID coming along, sort of that died a death really. So, you know, it could easily be revived, but we need some support really. It's not something that can be just thrust upon the shoulders of an individual school on an individual to do so. So as I said, COVID's come along, and suddenly, perhaps that's a bit flippant, but to say suddenly that outdoor learning is becoming fashionable, because obviously doors are open, children need to be outdoors to stop the spread. When school started, when pupils started coming back to school intermittently, you know, at the end of the first lockdown, example, the third of your class would come back, and it was into the summer months, so we were encouraging children to spend more time outdoors. We were obviously very well equipped for that, and like Emily has alluded to, the fact that the new curriculum is upon us really, September next year. Outdoor learning and pupil well-being is very much part of the new curriculum, and the autonomy of individual schools to design their own curriculum. So it's much easier to justify why outdoor learning, for example, would suit your school than it did 6 years ago when we introduced it. But it's something that, as I said, we took a pot down 6 years ago, and we're not going to turn back. We are an outdoor school. So I'm not sure if anyone has any questions, really.
That's really interesting stuff from the pair of you. I think fascinating to hear. Can I ask committee members, please, for questions? Lyndon.
Thank you, Chair. Can I say, Emily and Dylan, really excellent presentations. And Dylan, on the practical side, could I ask you, what sort of lessons did you use? You were saying you were obviously taking classes out there. So what did you use when you actually got there?
So for example, obviously you have so top of my head, you know, we could look at using the outdoors as an inspiration for writing, as a stimulus. We can look at taking practical science lesson outdoors, different materials, how different materials would help insulate something. With some of the older children, we could look at art, we could look at craft, we could look and just it's as I said, teachers are amazing people in the sense that they are so resourceful. So as I said, it's amazing really. That was the biggest at the start. That was the biggest worry for the teachers was, were they going to dry up? Were their ideas going to dry up? And what's happened is it just evolves. And as any good teacher will evaluate their lesson and think how I could do it better next time. And you'd be amazed. You're more than welcome to come and visit anytime and see and just to go down and watch how engaged the children are and how enthusiastic the children are, but they're all, as I said, engaged is the important thing. That, you know, and yeah, it's something we'll never go back on.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting.
While other committee members are thinking of questions, can I thank you and say that is really insightful. And what's most interesting for me, I think, is that we've got lots of links here with this committee. The committee's been running over the year, and what we've got is lots of information from lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds. So the committee this year started off with a very insightful session from Professor Chris Chapman from Glasgow University, talking about educational effectiveness and equity in education, and he pressed a lot of buttons. And then we moved into looking at the data surrounding vulnerable pupils, and what and I'm not sort of preempting what the committee members will decide, you know, everything will come together in a report at the end of the year, but it seems that we can layer the data, whatever you look at, whatever context you look at. You're looking at geographical issues, those sort of hot spots, and also hot topics. You know, one of the big challenges we've got is to look at using indicators like free school meals, but then fleshing them out and really colouring the picture in so we can identify better through vulnerable assessment profiles, which will be mentioned by our education department statistical officer, who's a mine full of information here. But you've just really added value in this context. You really have. Thank you. Can I move on to Councillor Fiona Gordon, please?
Thanks, Chair. I've got a few questions, if that's okay. So for Emily, you talk a lot about research in primary schools, in the primary sector, and you touched on secondary schools, and you recognise that, you know, it can be more difficult. The barriers are different there then. So is there research going on into secondary schools? And then also, perhaps for our officers, you know, how can we support our secondary schools to sort of capitalise on the obvious benefits of learning outdoors? But that might not all be for you, Emily, I don't know.
No, that's a great question. There has been research conducted in secondary schools, and quite a large project in England. I think it's called the Natural Connections Project. I'll dig out the report and I'll include it in my email to Gareth and circulate that to the group. Because, yeah, as you've said, the secondary school context is an entirely different ballgame than primary schools. And I mean, as we look to the new curriculum and with health and wellbeing, hopefully, you know, I'm positive that it provides more opportunities for things like outdoor learning to be embedded. But yeah, it's just, it is a different ballgame, unfortunately. And I think because outdoor learning has always been more suited to the younger years and primary school, that's probably where the majority of the research has been focused. But I'll dig out the reports and send it across the group.
I think you're on mute, Fiona.
I was, sorry. Thanks. Is there, it might be for Helen to tell us, is there an outdoor learning lead officer in Swansea?
No, our statutory core minimum is what we provide for in terms of our central officers. So we haven't got the budget, so we delegate our budget to schools. So that kind of funding would sit within schools as it stands. So we provide the core kind of statutory minimum. In relation to secondary, Councillor Gordon, we've got obviously the Shern network. So there's a wellbeing kind of research element from Cardiff University. That's right, isn't it, Emily? In terms of our secondary schools. So that, I think it's every other year that we have those statistics presented to us per secondary school level and at a local authority level, and that gives you a sense of health and wellbeing in the secondary sector. So that analysis, which is both quantitative and qualitative, can be used then to inform practice and provision in our secondary schools.
Oh, thank you. Just to come back on that, I know that Carmarthenshire have appointed an outdoor learning lead officer, but that might have come from COVID recovery money, which I know, you know, different authorities had to make quite quick decisions as to how they were going to make use of funds within a very short time period, didn't they?
I think Carmarthenshire have linked it to healthy schools, I believe.
yeah, I was going to ask again, if you don't mind. I was wondering whether this has added pressure onto Healthy Schools officers, because there's obvious links there. But I know that Healthy Schools officers have had quite a lot sort of put onto their shoulders since COVID. And yeah, it's I guess it's about how we share this good practice across schools and who takes that lead, because it is a lot of responsibility for that one school. Yeah.
Yeah, can I just come back, Chair, in terms of the recovery funding? And I obviously mentioned that we delegate, as much as possible to Swansea schools. In terms of devolving grant money as well. Obviously, during the course of this financial year, we've received £43 million worth of grant into our schools. So as you can imagine, a lot of money is sitting within schools currently. So it's within their gift to pool resources, really, to come together to on a cluster basis to coordinate some of this work themselves. Because of that delegation and devolvement of funds, we're not currently in a position to fund new officers.
Got you. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Fiona. Very, very interesting questions. Can I move on to Councillor Des Thomas, please?
Thank you, Mike. Thank you both for your presentations. Very interesting. It seems that it's a repeat of what I've been hearing for a number of years in my own family. My son happens to be head teacher of Beacon Rise Primary School in Kingswood in Bristol, and he's been carrying out this kind of part of the curriculum for quite a while, and it seems that England are a little ahead of Wales on the issue. And I've just got their site up now, and they've got the Opel Play Award, the Platinum Opel Award for play provision for children, and so on. And I know, when he's been speaking to me, he's been emphasising the importance of play in their children's education for many years, and he's found it to be very, very useful for the children. So if anyone is interested, just go on the Beacon Rise Primary School site, and there's lots of things, examples of where they used play, not only for actually playing on apparatus, but teaching, as Dylan has said, there's more. Maths and English can all be included in play, can't it? They have animals, they have chickens, they have rabbits, they have all sorts of things that the children look after and get involved in and learn that way as well. So there's lots of things. It is very, very important, and the sooner more schools within our group in Swansea take notice of this, I think the more benefit our children will get from it. So thank you for your presentations. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Des. Councillor Jan Curtis.
Thanks, Mike. First of all, can I thank you both for your wonderful presentation? It was really interesting. More a statement rather than a question, just to say I'm a governor. I'm lucky enough to be a governor of Peneriol Primary School, and I think 90% or more even of the work is done out of doors. And we've witnessed firsthand the difference it's made to the children's behaviour, to their well-being. And I often say it's not always about results, it's about a child being happy in school and being contented. And I think that adds up for more than results at the end of the day. So just thank you, and I think this is the way of the future. I wish it was like that when I was in school. I certainly would have enjoyed my school life a lot more better than what I did. But just to say thank you all, and I hope this goes on and is bigger and better than what it's been. So thank you very much.
That's lovely. Thank you, Jan. And I did note I always do this. I always take many notes, because everything's just very fascinating content here, I think. Happy children learn. Happy children learn. you know, and I think that relates to what Councillor Jan Curtis just said now. It's not, and I think alludes maybe to what Dylan said, you know, it's not about immediate effectiveness, which key performance indicator is being impacted by this activity. It's about that holistic improvement in the learning experience and environment for the child. Do you think that fairly kind of represents your experience, Dylan?
Oh, massively, massively. I'll tell you one little example, one little story. Knock on the door one Friday lunchtime. Little boy comes to the door with his mother. He's like Al Capone. He's got not Al Capone, the Godfather. You know, his mouth is horror film. Well, I can tell you his name, Jacob, but you wouldn't know. But I said, "Good God, Jacob, what's happened to you?" "Been to the dentist." He's been to the dentist. I said, "What's happened?" "I've had a tooth out." The mother says he's had an extraction. I said, "What's he doing in school then?" It's a Friday afternoon. "He's got outdoor learning. He insisted on coming into school." Yeah, and I got little stories like that I could tell you. You know, I remember one morning, nursery it was January. It was freezing cold morning, and nursery were on the way down, and the nursery teacher was a little bit nervous because obviously the cold, and they were 3-year-olds. And "What do you think I should do?" I said, "Well, walk them down the woods, and if you think it's too cold by the time you get there, walk them back." And they've had a nice little, you know, they've had the fresh air. 3 hours later, they're coming back, you know, rosy cheeks, beaming with smiles, you know, and little things like that. You, as you alluded to, you can't, data isn't going to tell you things like that. But as I said, it's very much part of our practice. Children come to school, they start to school. It's part of my pact if I'm showing prospective parents around the school, and they come to school, they know that they are going to spend at least half a day in the woodland. And what we've done in the meantime then is change the makeup of our yards and what have you, so that children can, as council, I beg your pardon, Jan, I beg your pardon, sorry, alluded to, that we get them outdoors, and sometimes Absolutely. It's down the wood, but it's using the outdoor space as well. So it's as I said, it's part of our practice that we'll never go back on. Our school even have lunch outside if it's fine. They have their lunch outside. Yes. It's amazing, and to see the difference in the children, you know, because we've got quite a different sort of area. Some really poor, you know, wealthy families, some really poor. But the difference in the children that we've seen over the last, and the pandemic has probably made it more prevalent at the end of the day, you know, it's brought it out more that people have to be outdoors. And as I said, we've got an SDF as well. We've certainly seen the difference in our school, and Alison is brilliant with the kids anyway. So we've run SDF as well, special teacher facility for the 8 foundation phase pupils, and they are they you know, obviously use it differently, but they have had massive benefit from it. Absolutely. They've even done a mural outside in Penrose. The kids have been involved in that, so it's been excellent. So thank you all.
Lovely, thanks, Jan. Thanks, Dylan. The Dylan Thomas Community School in Cocket. We know that Dylan quite well, the school quite well. And as a Cocket Ward councillor, we know how often the kids come out of the school and spend time in the community. So Gendros Community Centre, murals at Gendros Community Centre, planting at Gendros, different various projects in Ravenhill Park. And the school are taking the kids out, and this is again mirroring the kind of positive experience that we get from the school, from the children, and also from the teaching team, including the learning support assistants as well. It's enhancing experience. Councillor Hannah Lawson, please.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I just had a quick question really for Dylan about, I noticed that you said that your school doesn't have a specific green space of its own, and that you have to use a local woodland space. Mm-hmm. I'm a councillor for Castle Ward, so obviously a lot of my schools in my ward are in very, very built up areas and don't have a lot of green space around them, and a wealth of natural environment around them. And I've spoken to, I know the head of Wine Wen is very, very keen on outdoor learning. She's very, very good at looking for opportunities there. And in fact, funnily enough, they've just done an outdoor mural there as well. So that's another really nice thing. Yeah. But I just wanted to ask you really, whether you have faced any particular sort of challenges or difficulties in having to use a shared outdoor space, a public outdoor space, and whether there's, you know, whether there's ever any sort of difficulties with having to share that space with other people, with members of the public, the safety, the security, those kinds of aspects, the sort of practicalities of it.
So first of all, we don't only rely on the local woodland. As I said, what's happened over the last 6 years, we've developed our own outdoor space, our concrete outdoor space. Then, so all the foundation phase classes have outdoor classrooms as well. But as far as sharing, well, obviously we're lucky in the sense that Three Cross is a very tight-knit community. 4 of our governors, for example, are members of the local community council, and then the local woodland is looked after by the community council. So what tends to happen is that people are aware of us, aware that we're down there, and they sort of give us a wide berth type of thing. We're very much during the school year. We have a little area which we make our base, if you like, and it's very much, if the school are there, they keep away. Obviously, from time to time, you'll have the odd stranger walking through, but obviously we're well resourced with adults. We make sure there's enough adults, and then a local resident will, or one of the teachers will go down and sort of check the area before we take children down there. So to answer your question, really, we've had no difficulties. We'd be very lucky, but I'm sure it would potentially be a problem moving forward for some schools. But again, outdoor learning isn't, you don't need a woodland to develop outdoor learning. You know, you can develop outdoor learning on your site. I know there are lots of schools, you know, in our own cluster, for example, we have, so there's Bishopston Primary and there's Nelston Primary who have extensive grounds. But then there are also schools in the city schools, there are plenty of ways to develop their space to develop outdoor learning, all outdoor learning opportunities.
Oh, that's really helpful.
And the other thing is, sorry to cut across, but it's easy for sometimes what is perceived about Croyce and the Three Crosses School is the fact that we are low free school meals, we are affluent, we have affluent parents, but we don't only have affluent parents. We have pockets of parents who are less affluent, and we also have we've got over 10% of our pupils are statemented, for example. So, you know, just because we are in a leafy suburb, it doesn't mean it's easy. And the other thing that comes with, we have I only have £11,000 as a PDG grant, which doesn't pay for my toilet roll bill, to be totally honest with you. So when I see some other schools who have 6-figure sums as PDG grants, there's an ample opportunity to use some of that funding. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'm thinking about, we've recently funded a really nice initiative through the Environment Centre called the Hay Bale Challenge. I don't know if you've come across it, but delivering sort of hay bales with coffee ground fertilizers and teaching kids how much growing you can achieve in very tiny little space, and you could easily do that in concrete areas as well. So
yes.
Like you were saying earlier, teachers are very creative.
Well, yes, definitely.
The resources that can be employed.
Do you know what is
nice? Necessarily need a huge woodland, as you say.
I know everyone is a little nervous about the new curriculum. That it's been, you know, personally, I think it should be postponed a little bit, purely because we've effectively lost 2 years of normality. But obviously, decision like that is far above my pay grade and Helen's pay grade, to be honest with you. But it's given the autonomy now to schools. It's less rigid when you're designing your own curriculum. We're still going to need readers and writers. We're still going to need mathematicians. So the crux of it isn't changing, but the way of delivering the curriculum, there's much more autonomy for schools. And I think now is the perfect time to do it.
Thank you very much, Dylan. Insight. One of the points I wrote down here was about Helen's point, a balanced reviewer perspective. We're talking about autonomy, about cooperation and increased collaboration at a school level, schools designing and delivering their own curriculum. But then, as was said earlier, that teachers, I think Emily alluded to this point, the teachers were trained in a quite rigid way for decades. Your blinkers are on, this is what we do, and these blinkers coming off, well, would you say it's had a, put the fear of God into some teachers, because they now have to think very differently about what the school is for, how the school should engage with its communities, and those horizontal links weren't really on the agenda in quite the same way as they are now in Wales. Do you think that's fair?
Oh, definitely, definitely. You know, summer term, for example, you used to be so much about levels and which quartile would you finish in, and those pressures which were put on schools. Obviously, they have gone now. They have gone. They'll be replaced with some sort of, testing will come back, no doubt, in some shape or form. But we need to put more trust in the teachers.
I was on mute then. I'm talking to myself. Sorry. We don't have any other hands up at the moment. And before we move on, can I can I refer to a phrase that Emily used there? And I think it really is, it's a gelling phrase, like I think happy children learn is as well. Accidental learning. I like that. Throughout my childhood, and we've had this before when we had the session on physical literacy, sport and health, and we were remembering our backgrounds. All of us, I think, were remembering our earlier lives and the accidental learning that took place when we were kicked out first thing in the morning and told to come home at tea time or when it was dark. Somebody did mention, I think it was Dylan mentioned, forest schools making dens and building fires. I didn't go to forest school, right? But I did at least one of those things a lot, I'm ashamed to say. So it's that kind of is an illustration of how the links come together, I think, and that's going to be one of the challenges when we pull this report together, which is the way we will go forward as we head towards the end of this municipal year. So we've got Councillor Robert Smith in the meeting, a Cabinet Member for Education. Of course, Helen has just had to leave us to go to another previous meeting. And the challenge will be to take the evidence that we gathered this year and to filter that into a meaningful report. And I think there's some very significant common threads coming together. That's about enabling people to learn against adversity. So their vulnerability shouldn't be in the way of their learning, no matter what that means for those children. We should be prepared to do whatever it takes to support the learning experience of the child. Vocational education has come forward very clearly through this committee, encouraging children to step in that direction if that's the right direction for them. And the third key plank has been about physical literacy, sport and health. So that being out and about, enjoying the outdoors, rolling your sleeves up, playing sport if that's for you. I don't know, Hannah said previously, sport wasn't for her at all as a young person, but it really was. And as she grew and over time, that's it's doing whatever we can to keep children and young people on a positive pathway. The biggest dangers, I think it's fair to say, came through all the data that's been shared with this committee this year, has been through falling through the gaps in the pavement. That's we know we have those dips, and how do we develop our safety net, our safety net of support for all children, no matter what their background, no matter where they live, that it's there equally for all. And lots of the evidence we've seen really puts us in quite a strong position to I think, do something meaningful and important based on the ideas of cooperation and collaboration between schools, because there's excellence out there, fantastic best practice to be built upon. Can I go to who should I call first? Cabinet Member Robert Smith or Dylan? Who wants to go?
Well, I'd go for Dylan first, and then
go for Dylan first, then Robert at the end. There we are.
Sorry, just to jump in, one thing to point out as well, we've talked about the benefits of the children, what the children get out of being outdoors. But the other thing to point out is there's a calmness to the children when they go back into class. I think that's invaluable as well. Because I was pretty busy, if you like, for want of a better phrase, when I was a little boy. And you know, if I didn't have my playtime, or if I didn't have my time outdoors, don't try and get me to sit down and read a book. You could forget about that. And we all know children like that. And if the children have spent time outdoors, as I said, when they go back into class, sometimes I mentioned that they use the outdoors as a stimulus for writing. Well, sometimes they write outdoors, but sometimes they do their writing indoors, back in the classroom. But there's a calmness to the children when they go back into class after being outdoors as well. I think that's an important thing to point out as well.
Powerful, powerful.
Thank you.
Councillor Robert Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, when you said earlier about team games and sports, I mean, my position in any team game was usually left outside, say. So, I mean, you know, I share that kind of experience. But yeah, I think we've had a fascinating presentation this afternoon, again, both from Cruy's Primary and from the university. And yes, it all ties in with what we're looking for here. It's about how we tailor the education system in Swansea to meet the needs of every child and think outside the box and use the opportunity of Curriculum for Wales to do that, and not to have the kind of rigid one size fits all curriculum, which the national curriculum could become. I mean, I don't think it needed to become, but there was always a danger that it could become that. This gives us a lot more freedom. And you know, I'm glad to see schools, and Cruz is obviously doing this. Thinking, imagining, and Penrell is another one. When Jan was talking about thinking imaginatively about where we move from here, and I think the report to Cabinet needs to reflect that you know, we want our schools to be bold, we want them to be imaginative, and as I said earlier, you know, we want to make sure that our provision meets the needs of each and every individual child, and I think, and young person. So I think that's going to be the crucial thing going forward, Chair.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Robert. There's no other councillors indicating now, so just to thank Dylan and Emily for their insights and their presentations, and to assure you that you've added value to an already incredibly valuable series of policy development committee meetings. And what I think has blown me over this year has been the professionalism, the innovation, the dynamism of the teaching teams that we have in Swansea. And I mean teaching teams, I mean at the universities, I mean in every, you know, whatever badge you wear, whether you're a qualified teacher or whether you're an assistant or whether you're a helper, you know, the caretakers, the cleaners, they all come together in that learning environment at every level. And we've seen many solid, strong, incredible community links as well. And the way I keep saying about this is like the walls of the schools are coming down. The schools seem to be becoming better integrated into the life of their communities. And that came through, I think, strongly with David Jones, who's Swansea Council Sport and Health Manager, when he was talking about the dynamic impact of sport. It's not just about sport. And the Stour Cricket Club is not just about cricket. You know, rugby clubs, football clubs, you know, netball, hockey, all these clubs, their roots extend deep in communities. So it's trying to galvanise that and to bring those together. It's like, I suppose, you know, spinning wool, you know, bringing the threads together is the challenge, perhaps, I think. So that's fascinating. You're more than welcome to stay to the end of the meeting if you want to. We won't be too much longer. The next thing that we focus on our agenda is our work plan. And we are, as I said, towards the end part of the municipal year now. And if we go to the back, page 5, we've got the work plan that we've gone through in the year. And 16th of March, outdoor education was the last timetable session that we've got. And I defer to Democratic Services and to the Cabinet Member for Education, and of course to the Director of Education for the process of how we pull all this together as we go forward. So me as chair, I've started already going through all those meetings, and I get excited every time I go through them. You know, I've gone through Chris Chapman stuff recently, fascinated. So I'll be going through them and pulling together some of the key lessons for me, and then liaising with Robert as the cabinet member, and of course Helen as the director, and Gareth from Democratic Services as we pull the report together. Robert, will we be meeting in April, or would that?
I think we should take Gareth's advice on that. My view is we should, but we need to make sure that we've sufficiently ahead with a draft report.
Yeah, oh, you froze. Sorry,
Gareth,
Rob,
what's normal here? Because I'm trying to think back 5 years ago.
I think the last year, I had a look at last year, and the mop-up, the last meeting was in a sense a mop-up session where we consider the evidence in the year as we've gone through, and then agree certain aspects that need to be reflected in the report. I think that was the kind of approach. Yeah,
but don't forget now, we don't know how many of us are going to be here in after May.
Oh no, I'm thinking of April. I'm thinking of before the election.
Only the officers are guaranteed to be here, aren't they?
Absolutely right as well. Absolutely. Thank God for that.
What do you suggest, Gareth, as a way forward?
I did email earlier on following Helen's email, but I think the possibility is we can have a meeting in April at some point. It depends on what members want included in the report. So I think we can have a discussion outside the meeting and go forward from there as appropriate. It may be that we have a meeting this year, maybe have that the new committee in the new municipal year signs off the report and that goes to cabinet. So,
well, if you're happy with that, then I think that'll be a way forward, Chair.
Lovely.
Sorry, I've been offline for much of the afternoon, so that's why I haven't picked it up, Gareth.
Well, I haven't seen the email either, but it's been a fantastic, I think, series of committee meetings, very insightful, supported by people, as I say, from, you know, all sorts of levels of experience, lots of insight to help us as we move forward. The whole purpose of this policy development committee has been looking at supporting education recovery, which was the title of the report that went to cabinet in June last year, to face up to these huge challenges that Emily started off by alluding to, talking about the COVID crisis, really, and that will be the continuing focus as we move forward. So on that point, are there any last points anybody would like to make? Any comments at all before we close? No. Well, thanks everyone for your attendance, particularly to you, Emily, and to Dylan. Great insights again. Thank you all. And on that point, I will close the meeting. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.